Hello, we will start with module 11 today. Module 11 deals with brain and language development. So, in this module, we will try and track some of the developments in language acquisition through various stages. We have already seen throughout this course that language development happens step by step. In the beginning, the sound segmentation, understanding and recognizing sounds, producing sounds, followed by one word stage and so on, that we have already seen. In this module, what we will try to do is, we will see if there is a parallel between the language development stages and the brain development stages, or what are the areas in which certain kinds of language acquisition activities have been tracked and so on. Of course, this is just one module. So, we will not be able to give you the entire body of literature, but this is meant to give you a brief overview of the main main points of discussion, main theories and so on. So, we will start with a bit of understanding about the structure, that is the anatomical and the structure and the functional structure of the brain, and slowly we will build up the other parts. So, first we will look at language areas in the human brain, followed by brain mapping methods and milestones in language development. When we talk about brain mapping methods, we will be talking about some of the methods, not all. Mostly those which are more commonly used for child language acquisition research and so on. So, then lecture 3 will be brain development and neural correlates of the language acquisition, and lecture 4 and 5 we will look at bilingualism and its impact. So, in the beginning we will talk about the first language acquisition and its correlation with structural aspects of human brain, and in the last part we will look at second language acquisition. So, that we cover the major tenets of research in both the domains, both first and second language acquisition. So, to start with lecture 1 today, here we will look at the anatomical and functional organization of the brain in terms of some of the historical findings as well as some of the latest ideas, the hypotheses that have been put forward. So, first thing first, structure of the human brain, the basic structure of the human brain. To start with, of course, all of you know that the human brain has two hemispheres, the left and the right hemisphere. So, this is a paired sort of an organ, just like we have other paired organs like lungs. So, but there are some crucial differences. So, one of the most crucial aspect of the human brain is that the functions are unique to each. Some functions of course overlap, but on a broader scale, each of the hemispheres have a unique set of functions with respect to the human life. So, and when these two functions are two different kinds of functions are located in two hemispheres, they are the primary nature of these two are asymmetrical, as in there is no one to one mapping between left and the right hemisphere. And unlike other paired organs, there is typically what happens, both of your lungs will be functioning the same way, just like kidney also does. So, but the brain does not do that way. So, that is why we call them the functions are asymmetrical, meaning two hemispheres do two different things. This alongside the fact that there are some functions, there are some processes which have a counterpart in the left hemisphere, or it is being done in the right, but there is some counterpart on the left and so on. But overall the broader picture is this, that they are asymmetrical. And then another interesting aspect of human brain is that it is the control mechanism is contralateral. Contralateral as in the right hemisphere controls the left part of the body and the left hemisphere controls the right part of the body. So, it has a contralateral design which is typical of all vertebrates, but in case of invertebrates like worms and others, this is a simple one to one mapping. So, right brain, right body, left brain, left body kind of an organization. So, these are the first few important and unique aspect of the human brain. Now, look at the organization of the human brain. Now, this is human brain has intrigued scientists, philosophers alike for a very long time, as a result of which there are n number of different ways of looking at the brain. So, while we look at the structure also, when we are looking at the anatomical aspect of brain, there are different kinds of approaches. So, the most simplistic way of looking at is the gyral circle organization, that is something that you see with your naked eye. What does it basically mean? The brain is a convoluted structure, it is not a simple spherical sort of an object. It has a convoluted surface, which means that it has some, there are some, some parts are raised, some parts are, there are some grooves and so on. So, those are, that is how the human brain is structured. Basically, if you, it is possible to mentally, you can open it up and kind of straighten it out. So, it is not a straightened structure, it is a convoluted structure. So, there are raised parts and there are some grooves, deep grooves. So, there are this is what is called the gyral circle structure of the human brain. So, for example, the folds will be something like this, are much more tightly organized. So, the top, the raised parts are called gyri, the deep faces are deep grooves are called sulci, sulci you can call it. So, this, the reason why it is like this, the idea that has been put forward is, it kind of minimizes a lot of surface area into a very small place, very small 3-dimensional volume, which actually if you open it up, as I was just saying, if you open it up, it will be a large area. So, much part of the 2/3 of the cortex lies within the sulci. So, 2/3 is a major part of the brain structure is actually in the deep groove structure. And also because of this kind of a structure, it reduces the amount of axonal wiring that is needed for transmitting various kinds of signals across the areas in the brain. So, that also is a very good outcome of this kind of a structure. Another important thing within this is that although the same major areas are visible in all human beings, in all human brains, however, there are certain differences that are often genetically influenced. So, broadly the structure remains same, but at a minute, more minute and a more subtle level, there are differences across human. So, inter-subject differences are visible, which is very often genetically influenced, what kind of structure we will be ending up with. That is one, that is the broadly, if you look at the brain structure broadly, you get the sulci and the gyri. So, gyral circle organization is the first thing that you notice. Next comes what is called the cytoarchitectonic organization. This is basically looking at the primarily the cortical area, which has layers. So, if you are looking at the way the morphology, the function, the interconnectedness of a certain part of the cortical region, there, that is what we were looking at when we are talking about cytoarchitectonic organization. So, the cortex is made up of 6 layers, different layers and one top of another. So, there is a multi-layered structure. You can look at this picture, that makes the idea clear. So, there are 6 layers and each layer has not only has a different kind of an organization, different kind of a morphology, but they also have different connectional properties. So, each layer is characterized not only by the morphology of the cells within it, but also by the connectional properties. Layer 1, 2 and 3 communicate with other cortical areas. Layer 4 receives input from the thalamus. Layer 5 sends output to subcortical areas and layer 6 sends output to thalamus. So, thalamus is below the cortical region. So, the connection between thalamus and the cortical region, one cortical area to another cortical area and then cortical to subcortical. So, there are various kinds of communication, various kinds of connectional properties that these layers are they have their attributed to. So, perpendicular to these horizontal layers are vertical columns measuring 0.5 mm and consist of roughly 100 neurons. So, these columns are considered basic functional units of the cortex. So, this is what cytoarchitectonic structure gives us. Now, when we talk about brain, the structure of the brain and the areas of the brain, the division of the brain into different domains. One, of course, there are many important names, but one of the names that we are still using his research, his research output, the ideas that he gave is the name of Corbinian Brodmann. He is a German, was a German neurologist who published the most famous map of the human brain 1909. This map, those days 1909 they did not have the kind of machines that we have today. So, it was a drawing of the lateral and medial view of the brain with respect drawing from his understanding, from his inferences, from his studies. He was famous for dissecting brain in his kitchen. So, at the end of all of the study, he came up with a map of the human brain. So, segregated the entire cortical region into 43 cortical areas, and he named them like 1, 2, 3, 4, area 1 till area 43 and so on. So, the numbers initially he had more areas, and eventually he fine tuned them and reduced the numbers. So, some of the regions that were found in other mammalian species, but was not found in humans. So, he later on deleted them from his number of areas and so on. So, finally, he had some of the areas that are still used today. So, many of those areas that he gave out, they are called Brodmann's area. So, Brodmann's area 1, Brodmann's area 2, 3 like this. So, many of them are used even today, even though with time things have changed. Now, we have a lot more fine tuned machinery to look at brain areas. In fact, even today we can even go for single cell recording. So, things have changed drastically. So, as a result they have been updated, the areas have been updated, but many of the areas still exist. I mean, we still use them. So, this is the map that we have. So, I have not marked all of the areas here. I have just taken this picture which shows us the main language areas, language related areas. So, you can see area 4 here is primary motor cortex, area 44 and 45 is our Broca's area, which is one of the most important areas in the brain when we talk about language. And then we have areas 1, 2 and 3 which are primary somatosensory cortex. Now, this is the whole brain and this is the medial surface. So, it is this kind of a structure, this is the entire brain. So, these are two views of the same thing. So, this is where your primary somatosensory cortex is, and then we have primary motor cortex here, which you can see here, and then areas 39, 40 is Wernicke's area here, and then these are the most important areas. Of course, we have visual cortex, primary visual cortex at the back of the brain, in the occipital lobe and so on. So, these are the main areas that we are still these numbers we are still using. So, some of these areas that we will be talking about often. So, areas 1, 2, 3 is primary somatosensory cortex, post central gyrus, area 4 primary motor cortex, area 5 somatosensory association cortex, and like this. So, many of these areas that ending with areas 44, 45 which is Broca's area, and 39, 22, 39 and 40 which are Wernicke's area. So, these are the areas that are more relevant for us for our purposes. So, with respect to Broca's area, many of you might be already familiar. Broca's area is located at the base of the motor cortex. It is responsible for organizing the articulatory patterns of language and directing the motor cortex when we want to talk. So, basically controlling the mechanism of articulation in language is what the Broca's area does. So, it controls the use of inflections, tense and number, function morphemes like determiners, prepositions, so on and so forth. And recent research has also found evidence of involvement of this area in comprehension of tasks. So, this was a TMS transcranial magnetic stimulation study, where it was found that Broca's area can also contribute to comprehension. So, there are of course more and more findings are coming out. So, we are updating the idea, but earlier idea was that Broca's area is primarily responsible for articulation. Wernicke's area on the other hand, it is located near the back section of the auditory cortex. this part is involved in comprehension, primarily in comprehension. So, this is comprehension of words and selection of words when producing sentences. That is why if we have when we have Wernicke's aphasia, the Wernicke aphasia is an acquired disorder. So, Wernicke's aphasia happens when there is a problem with the Wernicke's area, it is not functioning as it should, either due to stroke or due to some head injury or whatever. In that case, what happens is that if Wernicke's area is affected, language production will not be problematic, it will not be affected, but what will be affected is the comprehension. So, that is why it is called a fluent aphasia. So, the patient might go on talking not in words or sentences, but in paragraphs, but there will be no sense to it. So, that is why that is what about the Wernicke's aphasia, because that domain that area is responsible for comprehension. On the other hand, if Broca's area gets affected by some injury or any tumor or something, then that will result in Broca's aphasia, where the comprehension is intact, but production will be difficult. So, articulation becomes very difficult. So, the other cortical areas related to language function are auditory cortex, visual cortex and the motor cortex. It is self evident why they are important. Auditory cortex is important because the spoken language is based on the vocal auditory loop, as we call them. So, as I am speaking right now, I can hear myself speaking. So, if there is a mistake that I make, I will be able to correct them. That is about your own speech. And then of course, when you hear other people talking, auditory cortex plays a very important role, because that is where you get the spoken input. So, that is why auditory cortex. Visual cortex, because a large amount of our language input comes to the visual domain. We read or we see signboards and all that. So, visual cortex is very important for language, and motor cortex of course, because for production of speech are very important. So, visual cortex lies at the lower back of each hemisphere, receives, and this area receives and interprets visual stimuli and is thought to be storing images. And then motor cortex, it is upper middle of each of the hemisphere, we have just seen the picture, and this is responsible for sending signals to muscles including jaw, face and tongue and so on. So, these are the basic very primary areas. Earlier we used to call them the motor cortex. Now, in terms of the brain, if we just say motor cortex, we are actually talking about a large room, kind of, if we compare it, because within the brain, each small 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter area also is a huge area, because there are those tiny domains which can be having different functions. So, but earlier we used to say this auditory cortex, visual cortex, motor cortex and so on. So, this is another picture for you to get a better idea. This entire thing is Broca's area. Then we have primary motor area, primary sensory area, and then posterior speech area and so on. So, these are the basic what we call language areas in the human brain. This is just for a representative purpose. Now, we also have something called connectional organization. So, not only there are various regions, but we need to have a connection between one area and another area to they need to talk to each other, they need to connect to each other in order to function. So, if for any human, a normal human to function, not only the visual apparatus should work, auditory apparatus should work, but they should also work together. So, connections are very important. So, this is the human brain also has some so to say highway sort of things, as we will just see. The structural areas of the brain cannot operate in isolation. It depends on a massively interconnected network giving rise to complex mental functions. So, there are lots of interconnections, as we saw it in a very minuscule scale in case of cytoarchitectonic architecture, how within the cortex, within a very tiny area, there are 6 layers and each layer has different functions, different kinds of connections, but on a larger scale as well, between different broader areas also there are lots of connections. So, dynamic cooperative interplay of signals carried by bundles of axons coursing through pathways along the white matter is what we are talking about here. This is akin to highways that we see connecting cities. The biggest, and there are many such connecting tissues, there are many such connecting pathways. The most important one and the biggest and the most visible one is the corpus callosum, which houses more than 100 million axons interconnecting the hemispheres. In fact, there are research that has happened when we want to look at the one particular hemisphere's working, that time we can to understand that we can artificially disconnect the brains by putting to sleep the corpus callosum or putting to sleep one particular hemisphere and so on. So, the in order to understand the working of the other part of the brain. So, anyway, so corpus callosum is the biggest connecting highway, so to say. Now, duties, in terms of duties, what do the hemispheres do? The right hemisphere, of course, it controls the left part of the body, but otherwise the most important, there are many functions, any textbook will tell you this, but roughly most importantly for our purposes, the right hemisphere looks at the spatial acuity, the awareness of position in space in all directions simultaneously. So, right, for any person to be standing upright and with respect to the things that are surrounding them, being aware of the surroundings, all of that is taken care of by the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere, abstract reasoning, physical tasks which require step by step progression, and of course, our own language. So, just to give you an example of how the even the similar kind of apparently similar kind of input can be based on the property on which we are trying to understand them, they can be processed in different parts of the body. One example is a very good example is the prosody. Now, prosody in some languages it can be reflected through tone. In some languages which are non-tonal language, prosody might reflect the emotional aspect of the speech. So, for example, if we are angry or we are at a cross with somebody, so the language, the pitch will go up, or our tone of, so the intonation pattern of the speech will change. So, in this case it is not a tonal language, but with tone, with pitch we are trying to express certain kinds of emotional state. That is one aspect of prosody. The other aspect could be the tonal language, like Chinese is a tonal language. Many of the languages in Northeast India are tonal language. So, here tone has a semantic purpose. It is not about emotion, but it is about semantics of the words that are given or the sentences or whatever. Now, the pitch of voice in both cases will carry the information, be it semantic information, be it the additional paralinguistic kind of information like emotion, attitude and so on. Now, the brain's processing of each of this information will differ depending on what is it that we are processing. So, this is seen, various kinds of neuroimaging studies have shown this using different state of the art machinery. So, emotional changes in pitch engage the right hemisphere primarily in the right frontal and temporal regions. So, when the prosody reflects the emotional state, it gets processed in the right hemisphere. A different pattern of brain activity occurs when pitch is used to convey semantic information. So, for example, in case of Thai speakers, the left frontal lobe is consistently activated in response to changes in tone. So, we are talking about prosody in both cases. If it is emotion, it is in the right hemisphere, if it is tone, it is in the left hemisphere. So, you see the point how fine tuned the entire system is. So, even if the larger domain is prosody, but depending on what is the exact variable here, which is pitch in our case, what is that variable doing? If it is conveying meaning in the sense of semantics, then it is processed in the left hemisphere. If it is conveying a paralinguistic meaning in terms of emotion, attitude, other kinds of non-linguistic information, then it will go get processed in the right hemisphere. So, that is what this particular example shows. Now, based on how the brain functions, how the different domains are interconnected, what is the process, based on these, the most famous and the classical model is of course, the Wernicke-Guestuin model. It goes back all the way to the time of Guestuin. This was a connectionist model of language processing stemming from the work of both Broca and Wernicke. And now, this model is not just an anatomical model, but it is also a functional model, because based on this model, the idea of the various kinds of aphasias was also proposed. So, this classical model of language processing was the first model proposed to capture how the adult brain processes linguistic stimuli. So, this model relies on a single word processing and deficit lesion association in stroke patients. So, what does it deficit lesion mean? That as a result of stroke, most common cases of aphasia will be stroke or head injury. So, in case of a stroke, if there is a particular kind of deficit in language production or language comprehension, let us say it is a deficit in comprehension. So, there is no problem with the articulation, the patient can speak a lot, there is no problem, but comprehension is missing. So, they are not making any sense when they speak, or they do not understand what the other person is saying. So, that is the deficit. Now, lesion is the problem where the let us say an injury has happened in the brain. So, that is the connection, the mapping between the deficit and the injury to the brain, that kind of a mapping, based on that mapping this model was talking about the different kinds of aphasia. So, if the lesion is in the Wernicke's area and you have lost your sense of comprehension, then that is what is happening, that means that area is processing comprehension, processing meaning. This is the basis on which the model was proposed. So, this is basically in very simplistic terms what the model is all about. It proposes an interplay between left inferior frontal region, which is the Broca's area, assumed to support language production, and a posterior temporal brain area, which is Wernicke's area, claimed to subserve language comprehension, and these areas are structurally connected by the arcuate fasciculus fiber bundle. As I said, there are many connections, many highways. So, this is the highway that this model focused on, this model talked about. This model served as a foundation for classifying the types of aphasia. So, as you can see, if there is a problem in Broca's area, then you have Broca's aphasia. Similarly, in the Wernicke's area, you will have Wernicke's aphasia. So, this is how the connection was, and this is how language processing was supposed to work. So, if there is a problem, if there is a break in the processing somewhere, then accordingly depending on where the break is, then you will have the different kinds of aphasia. That was Wernicke-Guestuin model. But in the meantime, there has been many changes, a lot of new data has come in. So, research on language neurobiology has undergone paradigmatic shift, primarily due to the various kinds of brain imaging techniques that have come up, like fMRI, EEG and so on. So, because of all of that, now we have a lot more data, and now it is known that the canonical Broca's area is composed of at least 10 sub areas, sub regions. As I was just telling you a little while back, that when you talk about areas, if we say visual cortex, it is a huge area. In terms of brain, it is a very big area. So, it is now we know that even the area that we have been, the textbooks were referring to as Broca's area, which is responsible for performing articulation as well as certain grammatical functions. Now, we know it is not just a simple one homogeneous area, it has 10 subcortical sub regions within itself. Now, if there are 10 different regions within that area, chances are very high that there will be at least 10 different functions that this entire area is performing. So, that is these are some of the later more recent findings. One of them is of course, this 2010 publication. And similarly, language relevant areas extend beyond the classical regions. So, we started with Broca's area, Wernicke's area and the 3 cortical domains, visual, auditory and motor cortex. But now, we know that these are called the classical areas, classical regions, classical language areas and so on. Now, we know that language areas actually extend far beyond this, it is not limited to this. Now, new findings suggest that language areas include regions in the right hemisphere as well, and similarly along with the right hemisphere there are many other subcortical structures which are also part of the larger network that are responsible for doing language. For example, the cerebellum, the thalamus and the basal ganglia, these areas are also important in terms of processing language. This is about the anatomical areas. Now, in terms of connectivity too, initially we knew only about the arcuate fasciculus connection, but now we know that there are many more connections that are also responsible. So, the connectivity of these regions is also much more complex than initially proposed. this is certainly not responsible, this is not restricted to the arcuate fasciculus only. There are many other regions. One of the most important names in this domain is of course, Eve Federico and her group. They have found out that there are minute differences even within the classical areas as well as the classical understanding of the networks. So, the arcuate fasciculus is now known to be a bidirectional tract that interconnects larger areas of the sensory cortex with prefrontal and premotor areas. So, we have now a lot more knowledge about the finer aspect of each of these brain areas. So, based on the later findings, based on these later understandings, there are very different hypotheses that have been put forward. We will discuss only one of them, but there are of course, there are more and new evidence is coming up every other day. So, new evidence indicates that there are 3 large systems of that interact with each other in order to connect language reception, production and conceptual knowledge. So, anything to do with language, you will be you already understand this, that there is reception, that is comprehension, and there is production, and then of course, there is a conceptual storage or conceptual knowledge or whatever. So, these 3 things are primary aspect of doing language or speaking or understanding or whatever. Now, to subserve these 3 different purposes, there needs to be a larger system, that is what this idea proposes. So, the first area is first Broca's and Wernicke's area, selected sectors of the insular cortex, the basal ganglia form one system, that is the first system. This system is called the language implementation system. Okay. So, this is one big area. So, there are 3 big areas that have been proposed beyond the Broca's and Wernicke's area. So, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, some part of the insular cortex and the basal ganglia. So, these together they form the first system, which is called the language implementation system. Now, what does this system do? This system analyzes incoming auditory signals so as to activate conceptual knowledge, then supports phonemic and grammatical construction and then controls the speech production. Of course, Broca's area is there, Wernicke's is there. So, together they do all these functions. Now, then there is the second system. The first system is anatomically surrounded by another system. This is called the mediational system. This is the second layer of the entire process. This is made up of numerous separate regions in the temporal, parietal and frontal association areas. So, this is again a network of the areas which are in different parts of the brain. What do they do? These regions act as brokers between the implementation system. So, they are go between types, they are connecting organisms kind of thing. So, between the various areas that are part of the implementation system, this area connects them together. Finally, there is a third system, which is a conceptual system, which is a collection of regions distributed throughout the association areas. So, basically what it means is that of course, this is a simplified version of the theory. I have simplified the whole thing, but the idea is that this is language functions are distributed throughout the brain, and it is the areas are, as we understand them today, are much bigger and much more complex and diverse as opposed to the classical area. So, a complex neural network that is specialized in language processing is what is now proposed. So, this is the crux of the matter as far as the language areas in the brain goes. So, if you recall our debate with the nurture and nature nurture debate, where there is a role, the role of experience has been one of the bone of contentions. That is what the debate is all about. Do you need experience or not? So, a strong nativist view understands language as something like an instinct or a special purpose mental organ, and which has its own neural architecture and its own genetic program. That is how the nativist theory goes. And on the other hand, however, now we have a lot of, as we just saw, that a lot of new evidence have come up, and now we know that the areas are different, different regions are working together. So, what does it basically mean? If different regions are working together, that means the modularity hypothesis of the nativist theory will not really be entirely tenable, because there has to be a network, there has to be a connection between different domains. So, visual cortex and the various other domains, basal ganglia included. So, this points to an epigenetic perspective, because this kind of connections are created. Of course, a lot of it is normal natural, but a lot of it also is epigenetic. They are dependent on the kind of experiences that we have. So, a more epigenetic perspective has arisen out of all of these understanding, all of these findings, in which the human capacity for language emerges both phylogenetically and ontogenetically. So, basically from quantitative changes in mental and neural systems. So, the way we do language, the way language is processed, language is understood, language is acquired, depends on more than one brain region, and it is also based on the changes in the mental and the neural system. So, this is an ever changing field. It is new evidence keeps coming in very often. So, we are updating the entire domain. So, basically this is the this is where we stand today, that there is a possibility of epigenetics also contributing to the language acquisition processes, based on the finding that a larger area within the brain communicates with each other, helps each other out in a more distributed system. So, that is the end of the lecture 1 on this, where I have given you a brief overview of the language areas and how changes have taken place in the recent past. Thank you.